Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Conquer the Clutter podcast. Today, we're going to look at 8 misconceptions about hoarding. I think it's worth spending time just offloading bad information, all right, so that it doesn't kind of slow us down as each of you is working on whatever issue regarding hoarding you're working on, whether it's you yourself or a number of people have asked to participate because they have loved ones that they want to help. So let's get started. So there are many beliefs about hoarding that frankly are incorrect. And if there's any validity to them, I see them vastly over-exaggerated to the point where they're no longer valid. So the first thing is to remind you there are actually 2 concepts about hoarding, 2 different types of hoarding, not as in what we talked about the 5 types, but 2 camps maybe would be a better way to describe it. The first is adaptive hoarding, all right? And adaptive hoarding occurs when people buy a lot, but they buy a lot and they use those things by the time they expire. So nothing goes to waste. And so that is largely associated with the first misconception, which is hoarding is associated with either having gone through the Great Depression or having parents who went through the Great Depression and have passed on the effects of that deprivation, all right? And so it's not, and that somehow results in hoarding, all types of hoarding. That's not necessarily so, largely not so, because many millions of people who lived through the Depression don't hoard, all right? And so, in fact, probably the majority of people don't hoard. What's being conflated there is the 2 different camps, the 2 different types of hoarding disorder. Well, it's not disorder actually, because the adaptive hoarding isn't actually hoarding that we're talking about. The first is such a thing as adaptive hoarding. And adaptive hoarding is when people acquire, and they acquire their supply because they know, based on their personal history, that they will use these things. It doesn't matter what it is. For example, people may stock up on something that's on sale. Many of us do that. Or it's available for free. But they do actually use those things in their daily life. And they use the supply pretty dead on the number that they have acquired before those things go to waste or expire. And they may be doing the extra buying, the bulk buying, because they have personal values, all right, about a commitment not to waste or paying the best price and frugality, or just an appreciation for how hard they work for the funds they have. They may have a desire to be efficient by using things for their alternative purposes, rather. So if it's not canned goods or foods or that kind of thing, it might be craft supplies that they got on sale for a project that they're working on, or one that is imminently going to start. It could be any type of thing, but the point is they acquire those things in the numbers that, based on actual experience, they have firsthand knowledge that they are going to actually use, and that moves to a step beyond intent. Then they actually do that. They carry it out that way. And if they find that they've purchased a little too much, they do an automatic counterbalance by slowing down, all right? And there are all kinds of reasons for this. They may also just have practical reasons for their acquiring behavior. Remember that every person who clutters does not necessarily go on to hoard. The point for those people who adaptively hoard is that they honor the things, right? They honor the things and they honor their own values and beliefs by carrying out the purpose for which they acquired the things. The purpose gets carried out, all right? And they also carry out their intent. I hear from many people who have the intention to do that, but it doesn't repetitively, it doesn't happen that way. Those who hoard adaptively have established the way to balance that. And they honor the things as well, because they don't have a supply that then goes to waste or acts as a false sense of security, that I have all of these things and so I'm ready, all right? I'm ready for whatever happens. That often happens, well, we saw it with COVID, that often happens with people who are buying food or toilet paper or products that we use in everyday life, all right? And so remember that every person who clutters does not necessarily go on to hoard, all right? And conversely, every person who hoards that I have worked with or I have spoken to, every single person tells me that they started out with clutter and clutter became a chronic problem. So that's why it kind of fuzzies the defining parameters of adaptive hoarding and what we're going to talk about right now, and we have been talking about in the podcast, which is maladaptive or compulsive hoarding. It takes on a characteristic of compulsivity when it has attributes that cause it to go out of control. You're no longer in control of the supply that you're buying, all right, in the using of it, assuming that your purpose was to have enough for at the best price and the best numbers that you would actually need, and that you would not waste it, okay? So with maladaptive hoarding, you can see that perceived intent of acquiring or saving items to have a stockpile, that purpose breaks down. So you're also not living your own intent for it. And as a result of that breakdown, you end up in first a cluttered environment in that area. And then if it doesn't stop or you don't get help to get control of it, it goes on to become a hoarded environment, which meets the 3 criteria we've talked about many times. Now look, there are many reasons why people end up maladaptively hoarding, all right? And they quite often have other complicating factors along with the actual physical accumulation that make hoarding increasingly harder to resolve. We've talked about some of those, and we know for sure being overwhelmed is one of the major ones. And we know that that happens because that executive function part of our brain, when we become overwhelmed, isn't functioning for us. It's literally like walking through mud up to your hips, all right? So I don't want you blaming yourself. I want you to start assessing how this is evolving or has evolved for you. Because if it's already evolved, that you're in a hoarding situation that meets the 3 criteria, or a loved one of yours is, whatever the vulnerabilities, whatever the beliefs that you act on, that you don't live the intent of those beliefs. All right. And the stuff becomes the byproduct of that. The hoarded environment becomes the byproduct of you're not living the intent you have. There's some way it's out of balance. Okay. Misconception number 2. People who hoard have gone through the Great Depression, or they are the children of those who have gone through the Great Depression, and they've been modeled or taught to hoard, to over acquire. That's not necessarily so. We all attribute our own meaning, all right, to the things that had happened to us. And our parents' experience or our grandparents' experience, sometimes when you've lived real, legitimate, honest deprivation, it's a tangible experience. It's real. Okay, you don't belong to the camp of people who are telling themselves, well, that happens to other people. That's not likely to happen. If you've ever really lived deprivation and it's had a profound effect on you, all right, that's something that you probably are going to need. Excuse me. Allergies. You gotta love allergy season. That's something that you may need help rethinking, because then it's about feeling safe. All right. And if you don't feel safe, you're going to be making just in case decisions. You're going to be maybe overthinking it or over anticipating the risk. Remember, context is everything. All right. But if you've had a traumatic experience with loss or deprivation, and you're currently not in a situation that represents the risk you were at then, please ask for the help you need to bring yourself into the present, all right, rather than living from the fear and the experience, past experience. All right, context is everything. Okay, so when life takes a downturn, all right, most people experience a sense of loss. And so, but most don't hoard as a result. So those who do, though, I believe, I'm going to give you a quote in case you're interested in looking it up. I believe that they may have organically or have developed a lower threshold for tolerating the side effects, the feelings of loss, all right? And then that may leave that person, if that's you, it might leave you vulnerable to assigning an overwhelming importance and meaning to situations that mimic the feelings that you had in that traumatic period of your life, perhaps. Or this can also be family stories when a family member has had a traumatic experience, whether it's loss or something else. Family stories are also very powerful, so we can live that vicariously. It's called vicarious trauma, all right? The point is, what is your context now, and how does it replicate or not replicate validly the context that created that loss or that sense of deprivation? There's a study in the American Journal of Psychiatry and I will put the reference in the somewhere on my website or somewhere. I dictated it, and it has dictated literally as opposed to the real name. So it is possible that traumatic experiences or other environmental factors interact, all right, and precipitate compulsive hoarding. Some people who hoard have had experiences of loss and some haven't. The debilitating effects that remain with us, that's what we're dealing with, all right? Remember, context is everything. Sometimes it can be, if you have a major loss, it can destabilize you and get you to that state of being overwhelmed. Sometimes it's not a major loss. Sometimes it's a series of much lesser losses, less serious ones, that happen in quick succession, all right? And the person can't restabilize. Whatever it is, it ends up in a state of being overwhelmed, all right? So the third misconception, I'm sorry, folks, is that a hoarded environment means that the person must be a compulsive hoarder. That if you have created or you're living in a hoarded environment, that you must be a compulsive hoarder. That is usually so, but it's not necessarily so. There are situations in which the person has no discernible risk factors for compulsive hoarding and still creates a hoarded environment. The two types of experiences or life situations where I have seen that happen, and I've done a thorough assessment with the individuals, and psychologically they are not hoarders. They're not susceptible to hoarding disorder, but they clearly have a hoarded environment, are aging with mobility issues, all right? The other thing that can happen, it's not necessarily aging with mobility issues, but having a health crisis that causes you to be able to be less physically capable and or less mobile. And I've had numerous requests for help from people who were aging with mobility issues or had a stalled recuperation from an injury or an illness. The problem, though, for most people would be that they can't get the recycling out, or they can't maintain the everyday detritus that builds up just because of the normal activities of daily living. But they're afraid to ask for help because they don't want to raise the alarm bells that they're not able to cope, and then someone comes in and decides that they should lose their independence and they should be living in some kind of assisted living. So the second type of hoarding environments where I found that people don't qualify psychologically, they don't meet the criteria in the DSM-5 for hoarding, is when they're in a state of acute grief. And generally, they're in the disposition of the estate, they either over acquire voluntarily, or there aren't enough people to, even if they don't necessarily like the items or want particular items, they are left in a situation where there aren't enough people to disperse the items to, and they may try to pass things off to other family members, the next generation and the next generation. And I think many of us have had the experience where the next generation doesn't see things the way we do. All right, and quite often they don't have space with job security and that kind of thing. People are having next generation are having to be out of the geographical area and moving from job to job. So, taking a household along with them is just not part of their life plan. And so the person who's in the first line of defense, they end up even wanting to, because of the grieving process, or feeling obliged to take a disproportionate amount of items from the estate when it's settled, and then they end up with their own things and the household of another person. And sometimes, if they have a large enough home that has a basement or extra rooms, all of the extra space ends up being allocated to these dispositions. And it's happening sometimes not because they want the items in particular. It's happening because those things that belong to someone they love are symbolic of the person, and they're in a state of acute grief. And this isn't the time to be deciding what part of mom and dad you want to get rid of. All right, and so they hold on to those things. One of the other things, though, that happens in that state of acute grief is that they don't reach out. They're so overwhelmed by it. They don't reach out for the help that is available to help them problem solve a situation they don't really want. They want the stuff for a variety of reasons that are perfectly legitimate at that point. But now they've created an environment that lingers, goes on and on and on and on and on, because grief goes through cycles, right? When you bring those things home disproportionately, for whatever reason you did it, it's not a short process, grief. And so that is a really important time to reach out for help to solve the problem that is created by your environment being taken up by and probably made unsafe. All right. And some of those things could be reaching out. Now, it depends on the impact. If you have a vulnerability to hoard, then I strongly recommend you reach out for help that is hoarding informed. All right. As I said, this grief process isn't going anywhere fast. And the second year often is even worse than the first year because you don't have the benefit of shock. All right, so it can be a very, very painful, raw experience when you're grieving and you're in your second year. And then it starts to dissipate. But remember, the more things you have around you of the item, of the person that you're missing, you're being cued and possibly triggered exponentially more than you would be to allow yourself the liberty of going through that grief process in a natural, supported, healthy way. All right. Things like, this is a time, if you really feel you have to bring those things to you, this is an appropriate time to get a storage unit. Right? But make a deal with yourself that this is time limited. And in about the 6, 8, 9 month mark, I would start going and looking at those things, coming to terms with what's there. Don't bring anything home. Go home and assess. Can you switch out something so that maybe something you have isn't as preferable, and maybe something from the storage unit that belonged to these people could be swapped in, and then this gets passed on. That's one way to start that process. All right, earlier on, 6, 7, 8 months. Make a deal with yourself, though, that at the coming up to the 2 year mark, coming up to the end of the 2 year mark, okay, you're going to deal with this storage unit. All right, and I know that there are questions already about that, and I'll be answering those questions in just a little while. Watch your feelings of excessive responsibility for things you don't actually want. All right, watch that. It's a really vulnerable time. Even if the things themselves don't represent the person for you. They're not symbolic, like you feel, mom sat in that chair, and we use those dishes, all the time. And every time we associate, we assign meaning and importance to things. Those things in and of themselves are intangible objects. They don't have meaning. They might have value. Then I strongly, if you think that they're antiques or you think that they have value, invest a little bit of money. Save yourself some of that storage unit cost. Get a legitimate appraiser in. Auction houses are a good alternative. All right, you do get some funds back. You have to share a certain percentage, but they're going to tell you what the market is because they own the market. All right, so if you don't have an attachment to those things, get whatever help you need to help you formulate a plan that moves you forward through the grief and also recreates a safe environment for yourself. All right, okay. Let's talk about the fourth misconception. If you hoard, you must be crazy. Okay, you have to be certifiably mentally ill and crazy because no one would live like that. Not necessarily so. All right. If you look at the criteria for most disorders that are on the DSM-5, okay, most of us have those symptoms at some point in our life. Right? We all are on that continuum, even people who look like they have it all. Okay, if they really were honest, they'd be ticking more than a few boxes themselves. Does it stay, though, and represent their life? Probably not, but chances are, right, they either came to this setback with their mental health, this situation that has caused a setback, more resourced, all right, generally less depleted, okay, because the emptier you are, the less you have to work with to get yourself back up to your normal. Okay, don't blame yourself for that. Let's figure out what the resources are personally, emotionally, physically. What are they? Let's find out where they are as cheaply as they're available with excellent knowledge to support you. Let's find those things. You deserve the life you were meant to have, right? So don't judge yourself just because in this period of time you have ticked enough boxes that this is hoarding, all right? You meet those three criteria. Or you tick enough boxes that it's actually progressed to the point of a disorder. I have news for you. The real positive of it being a continuum is, yeah, we can move up the continuum to worse. But it also means inherently that we can move down that continuum out of the phase that represents a disorder. It's doable, folks. All right. It's hard work and you have to persevere. All right. But I have to tell you with all honesty, in the 20 years that I have specialized in hoarding disorder, I have met the loveliest people, most people, all right? And if the very, very few who weren't really great, nice people, lovely people, it had nothing to do with hoarding, all right? It's got nothing to do with hoarding if they weren't lovely, lovely people, all right? And they're all looking for health. All right, so you're just one of the human universe, all right, that moves up the continuum and down the continuum. The better question, all right, to ask yourself is, how well are any of us managing our physical and mental health needs? Your homework, and I want you to come back with it next week, your homework is to make 2 columns. What are my physical needs? personally. I personally need 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep a night, or I'm not fit to live with. That's not true for everybody. What are your physical needs? What are your mental health needs? All right? What are your mental health needs? If you're not sure, go back to the criteria. Look at the boxes you ticked and ask yourself, how did that happen to me? And chances are that will speak to what, it'll at least give you a strong inkling about what your mental health needs are. And you're going to find you're not crazy. You're human. All right? Life's like a cup. Think of your life like a cup. Okay, we are all, every one of us, myself included, walking around with our cups already partially full. Okay? Life just sends you stuff. What would it take for each of us to upset that balance and overload ourselves so that the cup is spilling out? That's what's happening when you tick those boxes, enough of those boxes. In other words, what would it take for us to become, there's that O word again, overwhelmed, okay, to the extent that we become indecisive, because that's what's going to happen to you. You become sufficiently overwhelmed, and it is like walking through mud up to your hips. And that indecisive, that overwhelmed for a prolonged period of time, the longer it hangs on, the more it gets a hold on you. And what do you create when that happens? For some of you, I'm sorry, the question then is, what have I created? Let's deal with it. You deserve better than what you're looking at that's upsetting you. We carry inside us all of those things, all right? And life does deal us things. And so we need to constantly, to the best of our ability, all right? And if you're still upright with your eyes open on this podcast, you have capability, all right? You are able to do this. Every day, reach in and take something off the load, or a part of something off the load in that cup, all right? So think of it not as being filled with pebbles. Think of it being filled with pebbles, all right? Reach in, take a pebble, and deal with it. On a really bad day when you're overwhelmed and you're exhausted and you really don't feel like doing it, pick a small pebble. You're still ahead of the game, okay? Too much or too little of anything can upset the wellness balance when we're full, okay? Full to overflowing. The other thing I want you to do is choose consciously what you allow to be added to the cup. What and how much? Because some things, when you add them, you are more vulnerable to. That's why I'm saying to you, you need to know your uniqueness. What are you more vulnerable to? You want to think long and hard. If you're already in a state like this, of allowing more of what you're vulnerable to in there, because it has the power to have a greater hold on you. And it's just going to weigh you down. All right? When you have enough of what you need and you love, enough is enough. All right? Don't allow it to be the thing that knocks you out of the game. All right? Also, I want you to choose consciously what you allow to drain. All right? Drain the energy it takes in you to keep that cup, that backpack or that cup on that you're carrying manageable, okay? Because that cuts into your life, that lack of balance, and you know what? It costs you the quality of life that you deserve, okay? So with every decision about what goes in and what you can take out, I want you to ask yourself, does this thing fill my cup? Okay, because we want it full enough, right? We just don't want to be overwhelmed. Or does it empty my cup? And what does this choice that I'm going to make, and you can make it like that. You know it when you see it. You can feel it quite often. You know it here. You know it here, all right? What does this choice mean for my physical and emotional wellness balance? Okay. Just practical ways to get to the core of who you are and how you're doing. Misconception number 5, a hoarded environment and the act of hoarding itself must be messy and dirty. Not necessarily so. I have met many people who are meticulously clean and tidy and well organized, and it still qualifies as hoarding. They're still overwhelmed by it. So what's the problem, right? What's the problem, you ask? The problem is the excessive accumulation and the failure to let go in a way that maintains a safe environment. Safety first, always safety first. The things on the stairwell, the things in the hall against the wall, the things in the kitchen that are on the floor, the lack of counter space, all of the place, the things you stick down in the basement that are close to heat sources. Hoarding interferes with access to space that's intended for particular daily living use and activities. All right? You've got the activities of daily living quiz, the assessment form. And if you don't, we can get it to you. We can post it on the website. When those activities of daily living are interfered with, it's costing you, even if you've normalized it. The fuel load, all right, of combustible materials, even if you don't create the fire hazard, even if you don't create it, your neighbor's the one, okay? Or something, an act of nature, a flood, right? The fuel load is immense the more you have. Also, it will weigh a whole lot more wet than it ever did dry. I am not exaggerating that much, right? I have worked with people who had to move out of their homes and live outside because of the risks and the dangers, and the fact that, you know, there are stats on fires, right? And we all have a chance of becoming a statistic, even though we don't want to. And I've actually worked with people where parts of their houses have collapsed because they misjudged some part of the house, different for different people. And the elements got in, whether it was snow or rain, and the weight of that stuff collapsed the back of the house. It can happen. It does happen to people. All right? They didn't think it would either. All of those risks, whether it's fire or the collapse, they lessen the valuable, essential time you and anybody living with you, including your cherished pets, your children, your parents, your neighbors, if you're living in attached accommodation, that time you need to get out, to exit. And if you don't have those clear pathways, minimum 33 inches to one way out and one way in, 2 options, all right? Because you don't get to choose where this crisis will happen. If they are not absolutely clear, if you have to move the plant stand, that may be the deciding factor in whether you're injured or not, all right? Misconception 6, people who hoard can't discard. Not necessarily so. Some people hoard just fine, all right? But what they never do if they've created a hoarded environment, is they never balance the volume they acquire with the volume they resolve. And so somewhere along that continuum of acquisition, saving, resolving, we'll call it resolving, not just discarding, a bottleneck gets created. Unlucky people have a bottleneck at more than one. And that end product on that end point on that continuum, folks, that deciding, resolving, all right, that just broke out into about 4 different ways it can become difficult. All right. Do you need help? Do you need coaching? Do you need a resource? All right. Not everyone can afford services, and services are in short supply, but there's always a way. There's always a way to get the information. This podcast is one of them. Okay. Let's talk about the 7th misconception. I'm going to find it here. Okay. Apparently there was a lot more about the 6th misconception, but I want to do we've got some questions lined up here, so I want to save time. Misconception number 7. There's no good reason. Just do a little every day. There's no reason why you can't do that and get organized. A little bit every day and just pull up your bootstraps. Just do it. Okay, what's the problem? Just do it. Not so. If you're in a hoarded environment and you are telling yourself, I really should, I really want to, all right, then you're one of the people who are living in that environment and having difficulty addressing the problem for many good reasons. There's nothing wrong with you, all right? One of my clients, Kathy, when I was writing the book, said, "Oh, Elaine," she said, "have you not heard? Denial is not just a river in Egypt." So, yes, when we're overwhelmed, when we're feeling less than competent, less than adequately resourced, those are the 3 keys, folks, okay, to why you're stuck. We only ask ourselves, we only dare to ask ourselves the questions we feel able to accept or deal with. And if the answers are too difficult for us at that time, avoidance and distraction can feel like an ally, can feel like a friend. Denial and procrastination. That's why I did that many podcasts on procrastination. It's all there. Go back and listen to it and work it. Denial and procrastination buffer us from bigger fears. All right? Being overwhelmed interferes with the mental tools we most need to sort things out, to think things through, to arrive at better options, like the people grieving, for instance, to decide and develop a plan, to step up and follow that plan step by step to conclusion. Okay, problem solve along the way when hiccups happen. You know, life does deal you things. And so you may have a plan, you may be working the plan, and then stuff happens, it slows you down. All right. What I want you to do when you're sensing that you're losing momentum, all right, I want you to slow down. All right. Don't stop. Don't stop. The hardest part is getting started. So once you started, even slowly, even with great difficulty, if you have to because it's a bad time or something's happened, slow down. Okay? You do the same thing that you plan to do. You just do it slower out of respect for how you feel. All right? Take a few deep breaths. All right. Understand that the more frustrated, because if you keep pushing and you really, truly, honestly don't feel capable, all right, you're always capable of doing one thing. Know that. If you're still drawing breath, You can do one thing, one small thing that's better than it would have been before. But the more you push and try to work a plan that the context doesn't permit, and you're part of the context, don't forget that. The more frustrated and overwhelmed we get, the worse the problem will feel, and the less we're going to be able to come up with the answers we need. All right. Let's talk about misconception number 8. I'm not a hoarder because I'm not as bad as the people on the TV show. I'm a collector. I'm not a hoarder. Okay. As I said before, some of the loveliest people I've ever met have created a hoarded environment. It's more useful, really, to talk about living in a hoarded environment than being a hoarder, all right? Because you don't have, just because you qualify for the title hoarder, because you've created a hoarded environment, does not mean that's your identity, all right? You're not a hoarder forever, all right? So it's a label that belongs to a period of time during which your environment meets the 3 criteria. What is also true, however, is that whatever vulnerabilities you carry with you inside, all right, especially those that go unresolved, unaddressed, unidentified, the more frequently you're going to be in that, carrying that label, all right? But you are more than a label. We are all more than the deficiencies we have, and I've got my deficiencies, you've got yours, all right? Or the problems we have. We are all more than that. That is not who you are. But unfortunately, the byproduct of that, the buildup, the accumulation, however it's playing out in your environment, is costing you your quality of life. Okay, that's not good enough. So I hope these misconceptions, going through these misconceptions, have helped kind of maybe clear the fog a bit. Now we have some questions, and let's have a look. I'm looking for help, but can't find any, or else it's too expensive. I understand that. That is a situation that many people are in, which is why I do these podcasts. And you know, after we get through enough of the basic material, one of the things that I would like to do periodically is have people send me a scenario, and without divulging personal information, who the person is or identifying, and you can attend, you certainly should attend that podcast, all right? We started to put the topic in the podcast invitation, and we've identified, it identifies what the topic and the information is going to be about that day. We could put the scenario, a synopsis of the scenario, as the topic for that day, and maybe do a little bit of coaching through the podcast. Understand that a podcast can't be counseling, all right? And it can't be a therapeutic relationship, because I don't get to ask in real time, and it generally is not conducive to a large audience being present. But how do people feel about that? Would that be something that would be helpful? It would be one small way of once a week, somebody gets some feedback or some coaching that helps with a problem they're having, because probably if you're having that problem, probably many people are having, if not exactly that problem, something close enough to it. So what do people think? Are there any other questions? any other questions? So what are topics? Maybe people could send me topics. Oh, there are a bunch. Okay. All right. I think that would be, it says Zoe, I think that would be amazing. Coaching related to, yes, I think that would be, because you know what, guys, the reason I do this and the reason it's free is because I feel really, and this sounds hokey, I know, but it really is the way I feel. I feel really fortunate to have tripped over a type of therapeutic need in the work I did, and then have had the constellation of events in my life come together well enough that I can pass it on to you. And the whole point of this podcast is for people to get great information and for it to be free. Okay? Not everybody can afford help. I understand that. Crystal, I'm really enjoying this particular podcast. You have a way of encouraging. Where'd you go, Crystal? You have a way of encouraging without making a person feel inadequate or guilty. There is no reason to feel inadequate. All right? There's absolutely no reason to feel inadequate. There is going to be a time in every single person's life on the face of the earth, including the Queen of England, all right, where you don't feel able to do what you know you should do, what you need to do for yourself. That's not inadequacy. That's being a human being. So you're right. So many people do that. Why don't you just change your situation? What's wrong with you? You do. Every person who is living in a hoarded environment, I'm not lying to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat this and tell you something that isn't true. All right. There is a problem. All right. But your functional ability at this point, mentally, physically, spiritually, or the combination of those, that's the fuel we need to put back together so that you can find out, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? Okay, let me see here. When I go to a place and I take items out, I have them everywhere. I tend to want to put them in another room, and there I am all over the place. Okay, so Miriam, there are two things, right? While you're sorting and while you're trying to resolve whatever the buildup is, you need to have an area, not the area where you do most of your living. You need to have a staging area. It doesn't have to be big, all right? If you've got a couch and you've got a chair and you're not expecting company, the couch, okay, could be your staging area. You take one thing out at a time, all right? And if you're able to, an easier, faster way to do it, all right, is you take one thing out at a time and you use a vein scaling process. Is this a 1, 2, 3? I can't imagine life without it. I love it so much, all right? Is it a 7, 8, 9, 10? You know, really, I know I need to resolve this and some things have to go. And if something has to go, this is going to be the kind of thing that goes, all right? Is it a 4, 5, 6? Take the best example of the number 1 physically. Hopefully it's not a grandfather clock. And the best example of the number 7. And respect what your insides are telling you, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Is it closer to a number 1 or is it closer to a number 7? If it's closer to a number 7, it's almost certainly at least a number 6. So put that with the number 7s, all right? If it's closer to a number 1, it may be a number 4. And if it's a number 4, just set it aside for now, because when environments get resolved, 99% of the time, all of the number 1, 2, 3s, we can find an appropriate, effective, accessible, permanent place in the home for them. And we can usually do all or most of the number 4s. All right. If you do that, but before you start the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I want you to sit down and make a workable list of criteria. So what makes something be a 1, 2, 3? I think I told you last week, I've been working with a client the day before, and he's got quite severe ADHD. And so he gets kind of lost in and distracted. And, he's got lots of other qualities. It could be worse, right? And at one point, we picked something up, and it had to do with his early work. But it was really meaningful to him. And he was having a really hard time feeling because he was so distracted internally. And we picked this up, and he went, "No, I'm keeping that. No, this stays." And I said to him, that's what we're looking for. That energy, that feeling, that certainty, like that, those are 1, 2, 3s. The only time there's a problem, if that happens with a 1, 2, 3, the only time it has to be a problem is if it is irreparably contaminated. If it is, then we need to have a slightly different discussion. Doesn't necessarily have to go, but then it has to be saved and protected in some way that doesn't expose you or anybody else to the risk that the contamination presents. Okay? Okay. How do you go about finding appraisers for art and furniture? It depends on where you are, Shoshana. The bigger names, I don't want to actually, if you go, it depends on where you are. I have people on the podcast right now from New Mexico. So to give a name, one way, just occurred to me, one way might be to check them out on the Better Business Bureau. See what their Better Business rating is. And if they have an excellent Better Business rating, start. Just because you call in an appraiser or you call in an auction house, all right, doesn't mean that you're bound to do business with them, okay? And just don't go to the guy in the mall, all right, as a shortcut, because there's nothing to say that that person actually knows what they're talking about. Joan, I get so tired with everything in my life. When I do a little, I get so tired. I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall. So, Joan, that's a common feeling. One of the things, though, to keep in mind is you have to make the job that you're setting yourself out to do manageable. All right? It has to be in proportion. This generally happens when people are making little dents and things. All right? And then they turn around and they look at how much more there is to do and they go, oh, this doesn't count for anything. No, it does. Every single thing. Remember, slow down. Take a deep breath. Whatever is in that cup, take one thing and resolve it. All right? At the same time, try the best you can not to be adding to it at the other end, so that basically then you're creating stasis. Okay, stasis, like a basic level of, I won't call it stability, but you're staying in the same bracket of buildup. Let us hang in. Like Elaine said, that's right, one little pebble. One little pebble is more than not one little pebble, and you will get there. It isn't the big deal, the big cleanup. It isn't the big cleanup that's going to get you there and keep you there. It's your perseverance to keep trying. And on your worst day, you can do one small thing. If you're upright, if you've got yourself dressed, if you're going to feed yourself today, all right, you can do one small thing. Respect the context that the day gives you. When I go to a place, I take, okay. When I want to work at my accumulation, I know, Silver, feel so overwhelmed. I feel, anxiety, to the point of anxiety attacks, hyperventilating. It puts me in a rage. You're not alone. Silver, you're not alone. So when you're dealing with the accumulation, okay, I'm going to give you some advice on this, as opposed to like a recommendation. If it's too heavy, if it's too much, if it's too overwhelming, take one thing, break it down to half. If that's still too much and too heavy and too anxiety producing, too noxious, break it down again. And you keep breaking it down until you can carry it. All right? Just keep breaking it down. Because Silver and everyone else, you can do this. You can. I have seen people who had a tremendous overload of worries and setbacks and health problems, mental and physical, all right? Keep breaking it down until, if it's too heavy, you keep breaking it down until you can carry it. Break it down to its smallest bit, which is why I say one small thing. On your worst day, one small thing, okay? And don't look at the other things, Silver. Don't look at them. They're there. They'll still be there, all right? Don't give them the power to overwhelm you. If you're looking at them at all, you have the intent to make progress. But you've got to be realistic with yourself. Okay, and the other thing too, Silver and everyone else, the other thing too is this day is not just about sorting. This day is not just about hoarding. This day is a gift to you, and you're supposed to have, remember the 3 goals: joy, fun, and play. Doing something that reminds you you are a growing, learning, developing human being. All right, you're still alive. Where's the thing among your environment that will remind you you're still alive, you're still in the game? The rules seem to be stacked against you right now. That's the way it feels. All right, you're still in the game, Silver, if you're asking that question. And then one small thing, resolve it. And then as you walk by and you happen to notice the rest of what has to be done, I want you to talk to it. Sounds silly? No, make it real. All right, it's real, make it real. Look at it and say, I have plans for you. I'm going to get to you, okay? I did this because that's what I have in the tank today. I'm getting to you. You're on my list, all right? It's not today's list. All right, and then reward yourself. Joy, fun, and play. Even if you're overwhelmed and anxious, anybody out there who's feeling overwhelmed and anxious, all right, at the same time that's happening here, there is something you're not looking at that is joyful, that is fun, that is play. And I don't want you cleaning up the whole house and missing the opportunity today to find the joy, fun, and play in today. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It's just something that's going to remind you, oh, that felt good. Okay, it's there. In the book, Conquer the Clutter, I tell you folks about a time in my life when I was like, somebody send me something. Predictably miserable day ahead, because it was a predictably miserable period. All right. It was beyond my control to change that. What was within my control, however, I realized at great effort, it was not easy, was to get out of bed every day, look in the mirror and say, you're Ken Birchall's daughter and you can do this. Myself alone, I didn't feel able. But I reminded myself that I had mattered. My dad, Ken Birchall, wasn't even there. He wasn't alive. Couldn't talk to him. Well, couldn't talk to him in person. All right. And then I started to realize, you know what? Give yourself what you need. And what I needed then was reminder of the way my father would look at me when there was a challenge. And it was, you can do this. You can do this. Break it down. Work from your strengths. What are your strengths? They're going to be different from the next guy's. All right. This is your challenge. And I believe in you. There's somebody in your life at some point, somewhere, could be a teacher, who when you looked at them and they looked at you, you saw that they got you. Go to that place. Because you are still that person. All right? You are still, and you're still in the game, folks. If you're attending this podcast, you could be in bed. Okay? You're still in the game. Okay, we're going to have to end there, but I'm going to keep these questions and we will handle them next time. So, I will see you next week, next Wednesday, 11 o'clock. I'm thinking that maybe we need to work through one or two more things, and then I would like, though, so that I could be preparing future podcasts, for you folks to send me scenarios or a little synopsis, all right, of what's going on, what is the challenge, what are you dealing with, if there are any comorbidities like OCD or ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety. Don't forget to tell me that, because that will make the strategies that I suggest to you more applicable to you and anybody else who's sharing those. Okay? You take care, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.